Disaster relief, that was cut in half. So if we have a disaster in the state of Kansas, we'll have half the resources that we did in the past. And it reduces family-centered care, systems of care by half. So obviously, the way to look at a budget, essentially, is it's a declaration of priorities, is kind of the easiest way to put it. So, you know, when we all at home write out our budget, we put the things that are the most important to us first. And as we can see from the proposed budget from Governor Brownback, public schools take a huge hit, developmentally disabled takes a huge hit. Folks that, you know, I would define as our most needy citizens are taking the brunt of this hit. That's not to say that there are things that we can do to improve this budget. I look forward to working with Governor Brownback and the leadership to try to make this budget the best budget possible. But I, for one, will not stand for cutting schools to the degree that they're proposing, cutting the disabled services or services for developmentally disabled to the degree that they're proposing. I think that, you know, people keep saying, why would you run your state like a business? Well, we're not a business. That's the problem. We're not in it for profit. We're in it to provide a set of necessary services to the people that live in the state. And frankly, in a recession, the demand for those necessary services goes up. So that's the situation that we're in. You know, the funding that we're getting has gone down because we're in a recession, but the necessity of the state services that we are to provide has gone up. Now, as somebody with 2 little kids, I have a hard time wanting to put the brunt of the economic problem on the future of my kids' education. This is kind of where I land on this, and I feel like the majority of the people in this district agree with that throughout the whole election process. But it's kind of the rosy view of the next few years, but that's kind of where we're at. And again, I look forward to working, particularly on the Economic Development Committee, to find ways to kind of get our economy kick-started back in the right direction, and to work with the governor on ways that I think we can improve both his budget and improve the layout of the state. And, you know, but again, there's a line that many of us won't be willing to cross. So from here, that's kind of my general outlook, but I'd love to answer questions if you guys have them. So feel free to shoot. Yes, sir.
I agree 100% regarding the education funding. That area of our economy consumes what, 2/3 of our state budget?
K-12 education is 53%.
53 now. Okay, so over half the budget goes to that. I don't think that anybody that's consuming half of the state budget has the right to expect to be immune from any budget cuts that we have because of austerity programs.
Sure. And public schools have taken a significant cut in the last 2 years. They've taken a 6% cut in 2010, and in 2011 we were able to keep them harmless throughout the budgetary process. The problem is the courts, the Supreme Court of Kansas has required us to uphold a certain adequate level of education. And our Constitution requires that we provide an adequate education for all kids throughout the state of Kansas. And the Supreme Court defined what that funding level was, and frankly, we're about 10% below that funding level as is. And so we're not meeting our constitutional requirements right now as defined by the Supreme Court of Kansas.
Problem with the Supreme Court, they would like to do that. They will legislate adjudicated. So I think that's the point there. Unfortunately, the legislators at that time didn't have the backbone to stand up to them.
Well, the issue is that it was a broad definition of what is an adequate level of education. And that's the way it is in our Constitution. And so then they had to determine through a lawsuit, essentially, that went through the courts, what an adequate form of education was. And then until something is defined, somebody's going to define it. It lands in the Supreme Court. There's a lot of sticky situations do. So they were legislating by default, essentially. So we define what that is. Somebody's got to, and they had to. Yes,
okay, if they're not going to provide an adequate level of education, then you guys need to legislate to allow the counties to be able to fund the schools to a proper level. Now, I don't care if you just say Johnson County, well, I care. They can only add 3%. Now, Western Kansas, they can add 10% and raise it up. But they need to be able to add something. If the state is going to say you can't add anything, we're going to take care of it. Oh, we're not going to take care of it. Okay, then let them provide their own level of education.
So right now, what that is kind of relating to is local option budget. I'll just give kind of a brief overview of what local option budget is. Local option budget is, it's it gives local authorities the ability to raise their property taxes to pay for education. In Johnson County, we have to raise our mill. I think it's 1 mill gets us $3.5 million. Is that right, Gene?
I'm not sure.
It's roughly around $3.5 million for 1 mill of an increase in property values. The problem is in western Kansas, they have to raise it 10 to 50 mills to get that same benefit. So our education system, again, through the Constitution of our state, requires an even playing field for education. And so what that turns into, unfortunately for us in Johnson County, is we end up paying a significant portion of the education's funding for western Kansas. Every dollar we send to the state, we only get about 60% of it back. Now there's a certain percentage of that that's obviously fair. We have a lot more resources than they do. However, it's kind of out of whack right now, in my opinion. Now the issue is, we have maxed out the state allows local authority to raise 31% LOB or local option budget funding off of what the state gives us. So if the state gives us $1 million, we're allowed to raise 31% of that local. We are at the cap. We have maxed out our ability to raise funds locally, whereas I think we're one of two counties that's actually done that. Most school districts do not fulfill their LOB cap because they don't have the resources to do it, or they have to raise their property values so high to fulfill that local option budget cap that would pretty much, drive their property values through the roof, or drive their property taxes through the roof. So that's again one of these sticky situations where in Johnson County, if we raise the local option budget authority through the roof, we'd be happy because we'd be able to fund our schools and not worry about having to give money to the state and then having them trickle it back to us and take 50% of it at the same time. So local option budget authority is great for Johnson County, but it's usually not great for four school districts. So the question again is, what's the fair level for equalized funding for schools? So it's a complicated issue. Yes, sir.
Okay. Mike, KIEGERL is a legislator like you. This past April, he sent a letter to the Overland Senate. He makes about 4 or 5 points about school funding. Could I get your reaction to what he says?
Sure.
Okay, he says the state of Kansas has 295 school districts. Recent testimony documents that by consolidation to 40 districts, we would save $300 million per year.
That's a debatable point. Obviously, facts are great, but where you get your facts and how you get your facts are always disputable. Again, the concept of if that's consolidating school districts, there's not that much money to save in consolidating school districts because, frankly, a lot of superintendents play the role. Superintendent, assistant superintendent, scheduler, principal, vice principal. A lot of people play all the roles in smaller school districts. Do I think we have too many school districts in our state? Absolutely. We have way too many school districts. However, the real savings is when you consolidate schools, not school districts. That's a totally different issue. And then you're talking about busing kids an hour and a half each direction to a school, or you're talking about doing some form of tele-education, which, are we ready for that in western Kansas? I don't know. So,
And that next,
or they do it in some areas, but they don't do it everywhere. And again, we would be talking about requiring somebody to either A, telecommute for education, or B, travel 3 hours a day in a bus. So that's what consolidating schools does. Consolidating school districts is not the golden, golden nugget that everybody.
I wonder how much how much is spent on administration, and that goes into another point he makes.
Let me just tap into that real quick. Representative Keegrill's analysis is if you eliminate all administration in all of those school districts, that's what you would say. The issue, again, like we just said, is a lot of those people are wearing numerous hats. The superintendent is also the principal of 3 different schools. So that's a situation where you can't just knock off the superintendent in one school district and have the schools operate the same way because that guy's wearing numerous hats or that gal's wearing numerous hats.
I wondered here in Johnson County with having Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission and Lakewood right next to each other, I think I mentioned this last time, whether they could share some services in terms of administration. I mean, should the textbooks be different for somebody like lives across the street, like on Metcalf from one side of Metcalf to the other? And I think they get like in terms of food and bus, but
I'm going to be careful about this because there's a city councilwoman in the room, but I think that Johnson County has a lot of at school districts and you look at counties, and we have one of the highest number of government officials per person ratio out of any state in the country, because we have 105 counties, 295 school districts, we have thousands of municipalities, and that problem just kind of builds on itself.
Can the legislature go in and
we cannot, trust me, we tried to talk about a bill in local government last year that was giving local municipalities, counties, cities, the opportunity, kind of a gentle nudge, not saying they had to do it, not saying they were forced to do it, not saying they get funding to do it, just saying you now have the opportunity to review consolidating city and county government into one system, similar to what they did in Wayne County. That bill died 2 to 9 on committee.
maybe I'll take
I understand, because the fear was they wanted local control. You know, local control was the general, you know, was the beat that was being drummed out in that committee. But at the same time, we weren't as a state demanding that people do this. We were just saying you have the opportunity to do this, and people felt like that was the first step in dictating to counties and cities what they had to do. So,
And I don't mean to monopolize a couple of areas. The money received by school boards is misused. Until 3 years ago, only 58% went to teachers, nurses, librarians, and what is required in the classroom. The rest went to a fat, entrenched bureaucracy. In 2007, the legislature required that 65% be spent on classroom expenditures. The bureaucrats are still not saving on non-instructional expenses. Currently, only 61% of spending goes into the classroom.
I don't know how it is in other counties, but in Shawnee Mission School District, 86% of the dollars that go into the school district go into the classroom. We're one of the leanest, most high-performing school districts in the state because of that. And I know that big school districts typically operate that same way. Again, this comes to the problem of some school districts have 200 kids in a school district. That's problematic. Should those school districts really be that small? I don't think so. But again, you have to talk about, it's more expensive to just get kids to a classroom in a smaller school district. If you have kids coming from all ends of the county to one school, that's just expensive. There's no way to shake that loose. So there's some ground to be had in that area. We can improve the way that school districts are spending their money, particularly in smaller school districts. But frankly, here in Johnson County, we do a very good job of spending our dollars and making sure that our dollars go to classrooms, not to, as Mr. Kegel would say, the fat bureaucrats.
And one last point for instance. The unencumbered balances of unspent funds statewide were $1.4 billion at the end of the last fiscal year. Even allowing for emergencies, that is $750 million more than needed.
Yeah, I don't know where he came up with the concept of what's needed and what isn't needed. But again, what we've done in the legislature, and I'm embarrassed to say this, we're not exactly the most timely payers. So if you're a school district, and you and I have talked about this beforehand, if you're a school district and you're waiting for a check from the state, you don't get that check. You still have to pay your teachers, right? They can't just delay payroll payments. However, that's exactly what happens all the time is we're late by a week, a couple days, a month on payments to school districts, and they still have to keep their teachers paid, their administration paid, their, like you said, librarians, nurses paid. And so those funds, those emergency funds are spent in those areas. And again, in Shawnee Mission School District, I think we have $30 million. There's a pot of money that they have in their emergency fund. But really what it works out to be is about a month and a half of payroll. It's not $30 million, but it's
So if you have an emergency fund, it seems like now might be an emergency. It's got, you just save it and you don't spend it. It doesn't perform the function.
And again, every time the state is late with payments, it is an emergency. They use that money to stay afloat.